one of our favorite guests was on Fridays, and he was on Thursdays, and he's back on Thursdays, or whatever, Sam Kahn. So now he'll be back with us every Thursday. And if Smokey had not reminded me, I would have been sitting here, thinking you're going to be tomorrow. But Sam, before we get into the playoff and everything, the game didn't match the energy of the beginning of it in Kyle Field, but what were your emotions like, or your just reactions to the pop at the beginning of that? It was like a wrestling. Like, it was just like John Cena coming out. It was unbelievable, the open of that game.
Yeah, it was everything that I hoped it would be and wanted to be. When I got to the grounds at Kyle Field and I parked my car, I couldn't make a phone call. And I got there 3 hours before kick because my cell phone wouldn't get a signal because there were too many people outside. And the last time I remember that happening in College Station was when Alabama came in 2013, the year after Johnny Manziel beat them in Tuscaloosa when they came back for the rematch. That was the last time I remember about a quarter mile from the stadium I couldn't make any calls. And so the people, the energy, the whole vibe of the stadium was great. The game itself obviously didn't live up to it, but I still enjoyed every minute of it. The stadium was rocking, and I'm glad those two teams are playing again. It's the way it should be.
What'd you think of the outcome, Sam, and just the way that game flowed as far as a rhythm and what it showed us about both of those teams?
Yeah, I think, for one, it went somewhat like I expected it. I expected Texas to control it and be in control. I thought A&M would put up a little bit better fight because of the home crowd and everything, but the bottom line is Texas is a better team up and down the roster. They're way better and more diverse in the offensive skill, and they're a better defense at this point too. And you could tell that this was a year 4 team for Steve Sarkisian that has been building and building, and this is a year 1 team for Texas A&M. And one thing that I think that people haven't realized, and it really didn't hit me until the next day, is I think it's, I don't want to say surprising, but I think it's actually pretty admirable that A&M was in a win-and-you're-in situation in the final game of the year to get into the SEC title game. Because when I look back at that roster, and I was going through as we talk about the transfer portal opening next week and players are announcing, I saw Conner Weigman announced, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy also announced, 2 guys who were part of that 22 class. You remember that number 1 signing class they had in 2022? There's 5 of those. Of the 30 guys they signed, 5 of those are starting right now. And about, I think, a dozen of them are still on the roster. Most of those guys have transferred out. And so when I looked at the disparity in talent on the field, I started thinking to myself, all those guys that should have been third-year players that should have been the heart of your roster that were in that 2022 class, most of them are somewhere else now.
Sam, on Conor Weigman, what do you think is a fit for him style-wise? Like, does he need to be in kind of an offense like Iowa or maybe Louisville or something like that? Maybe Mizzou, that's like more of a straight drop back quarterback offense?
Yeah, I think that's going to fit him better. Something that allows him to just rip it, just cut it loose. That's what he's good at. Now, he can scramble and he can run around and he can create. That was what made A&M fall in love with him, and a lot of college recruiters fall in love with him when he was a high school prospect at Bridgeland, because he could run and he could freelance and all that stuff. But he's not a straight line runner in the way that Colin Klein's offense needs it to be. And so I think from that very first game against Notre Dame, you could just tell it wasn't a fit from a schematic standpoint. And it's unfortunate because I think he really wanted to work there. I think he thought he was going to go in there and kill it this year and maybe go into the draft next year. There were some conversations about him being a high draft pick next year. Obviously, that's changed, and now his plans are going to be elsewhere. But I think if you can find something that isn't necessarily super heavy on quarterback run, isn't heavy on RPO, something that allows him to just kind of drop back and cut it loose, I think that's going to be the best fit for him.
Couple really big hires by Joey McGuire here in the last 24 hours, Sam. I mean, they lose, obviously, Zach Kittley to go, start his head coaching career, which is understandable, and they get rid of Tim DeRuyter after a couple of rough years defensively. But to go get Shieldwood from Houston and then to turn around and get Mac Leftwich from Texas State today, I mean, that's about as big of a swing as Joey McGuire could have taken, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 2 of the more underrated coordinators in the country who have been hugely responsible for their team's success. That's about as good of an answer as you could have. And I was really impressed. The Shield Wood hire was exceptional, but I was impressed that Texas Tech was able to get Mac Leftwich because they weren't the only suitor for him. Utah was sniffing around. There actually was calling around yesterday, and he was supposedly in, I think, Salt Lake City. But Utah was making a hard run at Mac Leftwich as well. And I joked with a friend. I said there may be a bidding war. I said Cody Campbell may have to pony up for Mac Leftwich, and you know what? I guess you can count on Cody Campbell to pony up because they got him. But that's a huge response. You know, Kitley deserves a chance. I think he's done a really good job. He's rised up the ranks really quickly. DeRuiter, I really liked him. I think he's a good coach. They really struggled on that side of the ball this year, and you can't be where they were. And I think it's a minor miracle that they won 8 games when you look at where they ranked defensively. But he'll land on his feet. He's a veteran. He's a good guy. But Shield Wood is one of the biggest reasons Houston won 4 games this year. You're talking about the worst offense in the country statistically. I think they averaged 14 points a game. So for them to get 4 wins mostly rides on the defense that Shield Wood put out there every week. And Mac Leftwich, I think, has a lot of attention goes to G.J. Kinney because of his offensive prowess and his quarterback background. But Mac has had a pretty big hand in that offense as well. And I think has quietly, maybe not everybody in the country has noticed, but those who paid attention have knows that he has his fingerprints all over what's gone on at Texas State.
What do you think about Slade Nagel taking over and reuniting with Willie Fritz there at Houston?
Not surprised at all. Actually, when they made the move to fire Kevin Barbay, that was exactly my first thought. Was I thought they would try to go back and get Slade Nagel. He came really close to going the first time. I don't know that he ever actually made it to Houston, but that when Willie first got the job, he had committed to going over there, and then ended up staying at Tulane to be the interim, and of course ended up at LSU. But I just thought from Willie's going to want to do what Willie does, and they really found some magic there in that last season at Tulane, and he's been with Willie for 8 years and had that whole vision of what it was like to build it from the ground up at Tulane. And so I think once Willie decided to go elsewhere, I thought the first call was going to be, hey, let's go back to somebody I'm familiar with, somebody I trust, and somebody that can get us going in the right direction. So I'm not shocked at all, and I think it'll actually.
What do you think the future holds for Jackson Arnold?
That's a great question. It's, these situations with these quarterbacks who are thrust into the spotlight pretty quickly, and a lot of times they ask for it, because I think had Jackson Arnold not been the starter this year, he may not have been in an OU uniform. But it's going to be interesting because I think he's still talented. I think you have to do the calculus as a coach and a coaching staff when you have these guys who are out there who have been through the ringer and been through that. You have to do an evaluation. It's really hard to do of their psyche. Are they ready to come out and be the kind of player that you thought they would be when they were a recruit? I think there won't be a shortage of suitors for him. I think it would be smart to probably stay somewhere in this region. He's a Texas high school kid. He's super talented. I know there's plenty of schools down here who would love to have a quarterback of his talent. We just talked about one. I mean, I think he'd fit really well in what Houston does offensively and what Slade Nagel's going to do. I think he would fit really well there. I don't know if he wants to do that or if he wants to still try to be at one of those more blue blood type programs. That's really up to him and his dad. But I still think he's a talented guy. I didn't love the way Oklahoma handled that situation, to be quite honest with you. But again, I think you're a hard spot as a coach when the pressure's kind of put on you. They had to make the decision with Gabriel, and we left it where we left it. But I do think that sometimes we move on from these 5-star and these young, either freshman or true sophomore quarterbacks. I think we move on from them really, really quickly when they are not necessarily the only reason things are going wrong.
Sam, Oklahoma's hired Ben Arbuckle. 29 years old. You really will make us feel unaccomplished about where we are at middle age. But if he's already the OC at major college programs in his 20s, obviously the talk is going to be about John Mateer and what he does at Wazoo if he goes there or not. But that offense is going to change a little bit because it's a slightly different system than before. What do you think they look for overall in an offense? And look, Nick Anderson in the portal today, too, a wide receiver, didn't play for them much this year due to injury. They've got to kind of build it from the ground up, don't they?
Yeah, 100%. And you have to because, well, from a personnel standpoint, they're going to need to reload. They were obviously so thin in that receiver room because of the injuries, and they had so many ailments on that side of the ball. So, one, you've got to rebuild from a personnel standpoint. You got to rebuild up front, which is hard to do in a short amount of time. But schematically, I think tearing the studs down and just hiring a guy with a vision and somebody who's had a scheme that has succeeded, I think it is the right move to go with. And so I think Arbuckle, if he can get Mateer, that's best case scenario. You can almost have, like we saw a few years back when we talked about Zach Kittley, when they took all those guys from HBU to Western Kentucky. I don't know that you're going to go quite on that scale, but if you at least get your quarterback to come with you, then you have the familiarity with scheme. And that's one thing when we talk about quarterbacks in this game and we talk about the portal, that's one thing that is super underrated is knowledge and comfort level in the scheme. So having somebody that knows what he does and runs it is invaluable. So if you can get Mateer, who I think is a tremendous dual threat, great player, was a lot of fun to watch if you watched Wazoo this year, I think that'd be an ideal fit. But they've got to outfit everything around him. Again, Jackson Arnold and Michael Hawkins were not the only reason that team struggled. There were so many other issues around him. They've got to get that rectified as well.
Is there anything Texas Tech could have done differently with Micah Hudson? I mean, I think that's just one of those situations where he's a 5-star. It was already, unlikely that he was going to end up at a place like Tech to begin with, so that's why it was such a big celebration. But I don't think anybody was too surprised by this, Sam. And so what could be done differently is an indictment on smaller schools and 5-stars moving forward. Just how did you view that story in particular?
Yeah, I wouldn't make any grand proclamations, generalizations on it. I would say that I think when you are a program that doesn't recruit 5-stars typically, and then you get one, I think you have to recognize that sometimes you have to treat those guys differently. That's just the bottom line. We're in 2024. Player movement is very easy. It's very easy to get out and leave and go to another school. And if you want to keep that guy and you want to develop him, you have to find a way to do that, whether it's your day-to-day relationship with him, whether it's finding ways to get him the ball on the field or get him onto the field. And I get it from Joey's standpoint and from the coaching staff there. Are you going to sit your top 3 receivers who really carry the day for you? No, and I understand those are veteran guys. You're not going to want to just bench those for the freshmen, and that's not a good way you want to run your team, because your roster and your team is not dumb. They know who the best players are, and they know who really gets it done. That said, everybody you talk to over there this offseason has said how special a talent he was and how different he was, how mature he was. And if all those things check, then there's no reason why he shouldn't find the field a little more often, in my opinion, whether it's in a package situation, and I'm not saying you have to get him 60 snaps every game, but he only ended up with, I believe, 107 for the whole year. You got to get him more than that. And so that would be the only thing I would change. It's like, okay, do you take Josh Kelly off field? Do you take Caleb Douglas? Do you take Koyikin off field? No, but you can rotate receivers enough that you can find him some ways to get it, or in the punt return game, which they try to do late in the year. I think probably from a playing time perspective is the best way you could handle the better way they could have handled it. I think from an interpersonal perspective, just from the way they kind of built the relationship from a staff, I think they did fine with that, and I think they handled that pretty well. I think it comes down to a playing time thing.
Sam, Iowa State, Arizona this week. Who you got in that one?
I'm going to go with Arizona State. They've just got a vibe right now, and I hate to count out the Cyclones because they've been so good, and it would be so historic for them to win this. Given how long it's been since they won a conference title. But there's just something about that Arizona State team and just the energy and the vibe. And I have a hard time betting against Cam Skattebo. He has been just a monster for them. And I don't know. I think I'm going to ride the wave because they've just finished strong. They've done everything that nobody thought they could do this year. Not only were they picked last, I thought if they would have been 6-6 or 7-5, that would have been a really good year. And here they are playing for the Big 12 championship and a college football playoff berth. That's incredible. And it's a testament to not only how quickly they flipped the roster, but how well they've been able to connect and develop those guys and make it all work. And also, by the way, doing it with a portal quarterback with Sam Levitt, who's had a really good season. So I think they're going to get it done. I just think they're a little more explosive, and I think they're going to be hard to count against the John Haycock defense too. You know, that if anybody's going to be able to slow down an offense, it's Iowa State. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch this weekend.
Yeah, I really wish Jordan Tyson was playing for the Sun Devils just so we could get like the full meal deal. I do think that's gonna hurt, but it should be a great game, and the winner should be in the playoffs, Sam. I mean,
honestly, they should both be.
Yeah,
I'll be honest with you.
They should
both be.
So thank you. So they're the only league looking like where their championship game, and I know the ACC with how that works with Clemson, that could go either way, but like the SEC guaranteed both their teams are in it. Big Ten guaranteed both their teams are in. The Big 12's like, hopefully our champ gets in. I don't know how you change that, Sam. I know Brett Yormark spoke a little bit today and was talking about that. Where do you just think of where we find ourselves with the CFP? Some of these problems were foreshadowed, but all this arguing, the politicking, and kind of just the flat-out disrespect or bias, where do you find yourself as a college football fan here entering the last week on the CFP and the way it's worked?
Really frustrated because I think there was so much optimism and hope for what this would be when it first was conceived. And now here we are, and it's better than what we had. I'll say that, because we're going to have either Boise State or UNLV in it. We're going to have a Big 12 champ in it, and teams are going to get their opportunities. And so that's better than the 4-team invitational that we used to do. But it's still very flawed. And I don't like the fact that we're out here lobbying for a 3-loss Alabama who got housed by Oklahoma to go in over an SMU team that has yet to lose a conference game and whose only loss is to a 10-2 BYU. To me, it's the definition of insanity. And I fear that we're headed to a place where it's just going to be whatever the SEC and the Big Ten want. Everybody's going to placate them. And whether it's through just getting the at-large bids this time or adding extra automatic bids in the future, I have a bad feeling that's where we're headed. And that really is going to crush the excitement that I had for this and the enjoyment that I'll take from it. I will say that at this point, I was so excited for it at the beginning of the year. And now we've gotten here, I'm kind of jaded about it. I hate to say that, but I really am, because we talk about this conference. BYU's 10-2. They're not even going to get a sniff. Do you know that there is, in the Big 12, there are, I believe, 8 teams that have at least 8 wins this year. There's only one other conference that has as many teams with 8 wins, and it's the SEC, who, by the way, plays one less conference game. So they got those 4 non-conference games to build up their schedule. The Big 12 did that more than the ACC, more than the Big 10. They have fewer conference games than the SEC. So I don't get it. And it's frustrating, but I understand why we're here, and I fear for the worst.
Well, I mean, Sam, I think part of this has been the reluctance of anyone to call out the SEC that, look, you've had a great run, but this year's not part of that. Like, this is a new time, and your best team has 1 loss right now, and that's Texas. And the second best teams have 2 losses and 3 losses.
Yeah, and the problem is I think we're still treating not just the SEC, but I think we're treating every conference as a monolith. Mm-hmm. And they're no longer monoliths because they're too big. Mm-hmm. When the conferences were 8 or 10 or 11 or 12 teams, you could kind of get with that, and I could understand it. But when you get 16 teams or 17 teams or 18 teams, there is too wide a variance from top to bottom to just say, well, it's tougher in the SEC. Is it? Because not everybody's playing the same schedule.
Yeah.
Okay. The Texas A&M schedule and Texas schedule is not the same as Georgia's schedule. That's just the bottom line. And so I don't like how we treat that. And part of this goes back to the fact that we are in conferences this large. And if we were in a 12-team playoff in the previous era, when the Pac-12 in its old form still existed, and we had 16 conferences, then I think it would work out a lot more neatly and nicely. But we're not in that anymore. We're in this world because everybody's chasing TV dollars, and we have this half measure that I feel like is going to leave a lot of us unsatisfied.
Sam Kahn of The Athletic. Sam, talk to you again next week on Thursday. Your old day, new day, back again. That's Sam Kahn of The Athletic. We'll see him again next week.